Buenos dias, Buzzketeers. I'm Tyrell Ventura, and this is a new episode of Buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Oh, I love another episode of Buzzsaw. Why? Because it fills me with such joy when I get to talk about things like the Illuminati, the Hunger Games racing across America, crony capitalism, all modeled as libertarianism, and the quite possible Citizens United 2.0. And with me to talk about these issues today is always Tabitha Wallace.
Hello. And hello to everyone out there. As you said, the Illuminati, since we started Buzzsaw, I haven't done as many stories about it since we did at the beginning. I know Sean has some great interviews on the subject. However, we haven't talked about it much here. Then I came across a story that kind of got me excited about the Illuminati again, which is a strange thing to say on this show, but back on December 12th, 1972, Marie Helene Rothschild, a member of what is known as one of the most powerful families in the world, held a surrealist ball at one of the Rothschilds' many mansions, known as Chateau de Ferrier. Extremely secretive events. There were very few images have ever surfaced of these alleged balls that many who purport the Illuminati theory have said happen. And until now, when these pictures and a series of them showed up from this ball in 1972, from Salvador Dali doing his own version of Blue Steel to Audrey Hepburn in a birdcage, it is a cornucopia of Illuminati symbolism. I have to say that when I finally get to time travel, I'm going to this party.
Well, this is definitely one of the most bizarre series of photographs kind of to ever surface, and you know, apart from, you know, Lady Gaga, you know, salivating violently over like the imagery that these people displayed, it is one of those kind of very creepy moments of like, look at all these like, you know, very powerful people in this surrealist ball in '72. Now maybe it's just because they were all doing a lot of acid, but when you look at like the names and the people who attended this event and the secrecy of the event, it does beg the question of that kind of, you know, what are these like super powerful people into? And, you know, I must confess that, you know, if Audrey Hepburn ever came to me and said, hey, do you want to be part of the Illuminati? I am, and you get to marry me. That's a hard no. Yeah, I don't know if I could say no to Audrey. That's a tough one.
I mean, it's Audrey Hepburn.
But it's important to look at these things to know that, you know, that's, why is it important? Why do you talk about things like this? Because you have to pay attention to what the rich and powerful, you know, are doing, what they're into, what they're experiencing. Why? Because these are the people that I think we universally agree on kind of run the world to a certain extent. And we need to know what they're into to help prepare ourselves for whatever weird, bizarre ideas they come up with next.
It's true. And I think the one thing for me is from a historical and a cultural perspective is that when we talk about these things and they like to, you know, the naysayers of the Illuminati theories like to say that it's all just, it's movies and they didn't have these parties and it's not like Eyes Wide Shut and it's not...
They got weird dismembered babies and naked women and, you know, it's not that far off from Eyes Wide Shut.
No, and you're talking about the surrealist ball. You have Salvador Dali. There's a movement within surrealism, and there was a movement going on, and if you look at the philosophy of that movement, it does have, it coincides with what's going on. And when you have people who have that much power, that you have entertainment and artists coming together at these what were clearly, it was a hell of a party in 1972, it's understanding your history of these things and that these people are involved. And it's not just made up. These things do happen. You have women walking around with full-on gold horned headdresses.
Yeah, and like, you know, Baphomet, like, you know, big deer antlers and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of really just creepy symbology going on there. And maybe it is just a wild, wacky party for a few rich and famous people. But then again, you have to sit and ask yourself, you know, what's really the action going on there? And
I have to say, I've said it before on this show about the Illuminati and the things we've seen, like if you remember hearkening back to one of our first episodes, we talked about the secret hotel room.
Yes, in Texas.
In Texas, and all I could think of was that like, this is supposed to be the secret society's Illuminati. Like, where did all the style go? Here it is.
Right there in 1972 at the Rothschild mansion.
The Rothschilds had style. I'll give them that much. Well, as we move on to less happy stories than women in beautiful birdcage hats, The national parks remain closed. Government contractors are being laid off every day, and the fight over who gets to beat which dead horse rages on in Capitol Hill. But in Detroit, in the great state of Michigan, we have one corrupt politician who seems to actually be paying for his crimes. Former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick was sentenced to 28 years in prison this week on over 17 federal counts, including mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, all taking place during his tenure as mayor. His actions have been directly linked to the city's bankruptcy. And in the words of Adolfo Mongo, who was a political consultant who worked for Mr. Kilpatrick's re-election campaign, he says, quote, "He's become the poster child for what went wrong with the city and why it went bankrupt." Kilpatrick has said this, quote, "They're hurting. A great deal of that hurt I accept full responsibility for," end quote. Lawyers for Kilpatrick, of course, intend to file an appeal of the conviction and the sentence.
Well, I think this is an important story to look at because it's a microcosm, I think, of what's happening on a federal level when you get into these, when you get into them talking about the debt ceiling and
Right.
shutting down the federal government, that, if this local mayor of one of the biggest, one of the big cities in the country is this corrupt, what's happening on a federal level. And so that's why it's important to look at stories like these. I mean, in 2008, Mr. Kilpatrick resigned after he lied under oath during a police whistleblowing lawsuit and approved an $8.4 million settlement to try and cover it up. Then after he pled guilty to obstruction of, charges of obstruction of justice, Kilpatrick served 4 months in jail and was ordered to pay $1 million back to the city. And then he was behind bars again for hiding assets from the court and telling a judge that he could afford to pay only $6 a month in restitution. This is a guy who's clearly a criminal holding office. And it always begs that question, how many more criminals are holding office?
That we don't know about. He was convicted in March on 24 counts that included racketeering and extortion. And that was along with 18 city officials who had been convicted of corruption during his tenure. They were all connected. She's talking about only the 20 people who got convicted and who were found out about what they were doing. This was straight up mob mentality.
Oh, yeah.
They were, we're talking about cash for contracts. You're talking about people getting jobs who shouldn't have been getting jobs. It was incredibly corrupt. And
it was the standard kind of graft and ickiness that goes on in politics, I think, on a daily basis in this country. And it's nice to see that these guys were caught. I do have a question. I don't know all the logistics of it, but after all of these things and being charged and lying under oath and all of this thing, God, the people of Detroit must have been like, who the hell were we voting for?
Oh, I know.
The lies that they tell on the campaign trail, it just boggles the mind at how this guy's doing all this moving and shaking behind the scenes, and yet probably on the campaign trail saying, I'm here and I'm working for you, and I'm going to raise up the city of Detroit along with my bank account.
Yeah, he thought that flashy suits and being, but what's really sad is he really did give this, he's everything that's wrong with America when you have somebody who went up and had flashy cars and flashy suits to be like, I'm the mayor of Detroit, it's all going to be okay, and they was using their money to sort of, it's old school. It's, the king who covers himself in gold so that his people believe that he's, powerful and there's lots of money, and really he's using the money that should be used to feed them to put gold on them.
It is good to know that his punishment ranks amongst one of the harshest major state and local police corruption cases. Of all the police corruption and all public corruption cases we've had across this country, his punishment was one of the most severe.
And he deserves it. He deserves every
when you
minute.
have Detroit looking like that, you would hope they'd get some mayors in there that weren't acting like this.
Right. Well, as Kwame Kilpatrick is sort of taking responsibility for his actions, although says that he's going to appeal, some other government officials, if they're quite ready to take responsibility, on Wednesday, October 19th, during a meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee, NSA Director Keith Alexander became yet another government official to admit a crime against the citizens of the United States and just forget to lie about it. Committee Chairman Senator Patrick Leahy stated that, quote, there is no evidence that bulk phone records collections helped to thwart dozens or even several terrorist plots. Leahy then asked the NSA chief to admit that only 13 out of the previously claimed 54 cases of foiled plots were genuinely the fruits of the government's vast dragnet surveillance system, going on to say, quote, "They weren't all plots and they weren't all foiled. Would you agree with that? Yes or no?" "Yes," replied Mr. Alexander.
We reported this story back over the summer when it kind
Yeah.
of happened, and I remember we had talked about how, 1 minute when the NSA corruption and spying story first broke, they were, getting up in front of Congress saying, well, we thwarted 20 attacks, then it was 30, then it was 50, maybe even 100, and he was one of the kind of main liars behind this.
Right.
And what's interesting to note is that now, there's rumors on Capitol Hill that he's all upset because he's being hung out to dry because of things like this.
Yeah.
And why isn't Obama protecting me? Sorry, you lied to the American people about the NSA surveillance program and then tried to, gussy it up saying like, oh, look at what a good job we're doing.
know.
Bullshit on you, Mr. Alexander. And quite frankly, you're a despicable human being because, again, it's that culture of lies. You see it in a microcosm of Detroit, and now you see it up here at the highest level.
Yeah.
The officials basically put out numbers that vastly overstated the counterterrorism successes of the government's warrantless wiretapping, and I mean they just spread it out there, heavy.
And you have-
Every news show carried that.
And you have people like Mr. Leahy and Representative James Sensenbrenner Jr., a Wisconsin Republican and author of the U.S. Patriot Act, which the government says allows this bulk data collection, and they're working on a bill to roll back that authority. So people who actually wrote this bill are now going, I think we might have made a mistake. They're also proposing things like a special advocacy office with appellate powers to be part of the proceedings of the secret FISA courts that we've talked about a lot on here, and requiring the court to release those secret opinions that lay out interpretations of the law, which is something we've talked about. You can't have secret courts that are interpreting the law and then not let people actually see that interpretation of the law. It goes back to the idea that you're telling us something's illegal and we're responsible to not break a law and not do something, but you won't tell us what those laws are or what's going on.
Because at the end of the day, the NSA is there to spy on everyone. I actually got a little bit of good news about the NSA is that their big, huge Colorado facility, or Denver facility that we've heard about, that they're building this massive thing. Apparently they finished it, tried to boot it up, and everything burned out. So now they're another year away from being able to use it, which is a little bit good news for us fighting on the side of of transparency. They're not quite there yet, thank God.
Right.
It's interesting to hear the other liar. James R. Clapper, he was quoted as saying, in response to all this, in response to Alexander saying, yes, we did make it up. He came out and said, well, I think there's another metric here that's very important. I would call it the peace of mind metric. So though we inflated the numbers, we just were trying to give you a good peace of mind, in our lives. We just want to make sure you're feeling okay.
Well, thanks.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James.
You piece of shit. Moving on.
Speaking of other pieces of shit, last Tuesday, we talk about Citizens United. Last Tuesday, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in a case that campaign finance reformers are calling the next son of Citizens United. And if there was ever a reboot we didn't need, it's this one. Sean McCutcheon, a wealthy businessman, and the Republican National Committee sued the Federal Elections Commission to challenge its aggregate limits on individual contributions to candidates, party committees, and political committees to donate to such groups. If the Supreme Court sides with McCutcheon on this and the RNC, a single donor could have the potential to donate to an elected official in upwards to $1 million for each election cycle. That's a huge leap, keep in mind, from the current cap of just under $50,000, just under $50,000. McCutcheon's reason for the suit is, it's adorable. Quote, "I just want to donate to more candidates. Why am I not free to spend money however I want? If we win, we'll create more competition in the political market. We, the people, will have more influence," end quote. No, we, the people with money, will have more influence. And the fact that you referred to it as the political marketplace and that you're trying to put capitalism and sort of lay it on top like a doily onto elections is
it's
pretty ridiculous.
It is ridiculous because I'm sorry, you capitalistic principles, whether you agree with them or not, whether abused or not, they can be very brilliant principles. However, you don't need them in every position of power in our government. The government shouldn't be run like a business. It shouldn't follow under those same restrictions. I know people parade that around a lot, but it's not, because it's not a for-profit business. It's not supposed to be. It's a government. And McCutcheon and the RNC are not challenging the limits on individual donations to particular candidates. Rather, they're kind of challenging the limits on the total amount a wealthy individual can give to candidates and committees during election cycle.
Right, and there's the limits now are currently there's, I believe it's a full $123,200 overall limit on federal level campaign donations, and that was during the 2013 through 2014. Keep in mind that number is 2.5 times the current U.S. median household income. And what happens is this is a two-pronged thing that adds up to that number. There's a $48,600 limit, which is a weird number that they come up with, a limit on combined donations to all candidates, and a $74,600 limit on all combined gifts to political action committees. So when you put those all together, he's saying it's not enough that I can give $123,000. I want to be able to give $1 million.
Yeah. I want to be able to give as many candidates as I possibly can, as much money as I possibly can. And he's saying it's his right to do that. And because we've had decisions like Citizens United come in, he does have that argument. I'll give him that. He has an argument to make the case. But let's really look at it. It's exactly like you said. This is about wealthy people being able to do this. The average everyday citizen in this country, as you said, it's 2.5 times the current U.S. household median of income. The average person can't give that much.
The average family of 4 doesn't even make half that. And you're trying to sit there and say that this is
Well, at the end of the day,
these are the people who always who will sit there and tell you it's for the people.
Well, it's trying to turn individual donations into Citizens United. That was because that was basically the ability for corporations to give to these super PACs, and then where there's they can accept donations of unlimited size to these super PACs and all that. It's basically trying to do that on an individual level.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I have to disagree with it because, like I said, capitalist ideas don't necessarily work for every situation in this country and every situation of government. I don't want more ability for powerful people to make payoffs and bribes to politicians. I cannot stand for that. Sadly, I bet the Supreme Court, will push it through. Other people who don't stand for it are, a coalition of progressive groups and campaign finance watchdogs. They're arguing that removing the caps on a total amount of money that wealthy donors can give directly to candidates and committees would give, exactly as I said, the rich and powerful even more sway over lawmakers and further erode our democracy.
Exactly, and you have people like Marge Baker, who is the executive vice president of People for the American Way, who said, quote, "Our Constitution's authors did not envision a government of corporations and the wealthy. They envisioned a government of the people. This case threatens the very foundations of that system." And I have to thank Marge for saying that, because I think that's the thing we keep forgetting, is that everybody will point to the Constitution for whatever particular thing suits them and their political or financial gain. People, if you look at, whether it's guns or healthcare or prisons or food stamps or whatever you're talking about, whoever's pushing an agenda has a financial stake in it.
Yes.
And that is not what we're based on. It's not that, it wasn't what we were
That's
built
not
on. That it wasn't what,
libertarianism. That's not
it's
the
not even
essence of
Republic.
that.
It's not. It doesn't actually fit with the ideology, the basic ideology and the basic, cornerstones of being a Democrat or the Republican Party or it doesn't fit with anybody. None of you should be doing this because it doesn't fit in with your ideology that you're, telling other people to follow.
I agree. No, it's a disgusting thing. It's a disgusting thing. And I hope the Supreme Court shoots it down. I have a feeling they're not, but we'll have to keep it, it's going to come up very quickly. So we'll have to keep tabs on it and see what becomes of this.
Go online, shoot some emails to some Supreme Court justices. Learn your Supreme Court justices. Find their Twitter pages and let them know. I mean, these people sit somewhere.
Clarence Thomas is a genius on Twitter, man. I follow him all the time.
Pretty great.
I have no idea if he's on Twitter or not.
But anyway. But find them, speak to them, send them letters. I mean, at this point, why I don't, we have our elected officials. Well, these people hold all the cards. And I think we need to sort of show them ours a little bit. Not to venture off on
too wild of a tangent here, but let's be honest. Why is the Supreme Court sitting up there for life? Why is it when you're appointed to the Supreme Court, you have a lifetime contract to sit on the Supreme Court? I'm sorry, there's a certain point where you just get too old and too white, and you're not, and you're not in tune with the nature of the country. And,
I know, we're finally getting that, I mean, it's still, you look at it, it's not a cross-section of the United States, ideologically, gender, race, religion, it's not a cross-section. And I don't mind the Supreme Court if that was a cross-section, a truly cross-section.
And also when you have people who are assured of a job for their entire lives, that makes it, I think, a lot easier to be corrupted or to, manipulate the system for the ends of your friends or for the ends of the political beliefs you believe in, rather than being an honest judge.
Yeah.
Rather than just sitting and saying, I'm going to look at the legal merits of this case. Right. When you're up there for life, you can't be fired.
Yeah, what are they going to do?
So where's the check and balance?
What? I don't have to get reelected. So who cares? Speaking of things that make me not so happy, there are things about the Catholic Church that I fundamentally disagree on. However, I think there's probably one thing that the Church and I can agree on. You never, ever mess with a nun. Apparently somebody didn't let the nice people in Tennessee know about that little rule that we all learned. An 83-year-old Roman Catholic nun is facing up to 30 years in prison for trespassing onto a nuclear weapons facility in Tennessee to protest that facility's existence. Back in July 2012, Sister Megan Rice and 2 other peace activists staged a nonviolent protest to they wanted to sort of symbolically disarm the Oak Ridge Y-12 nuclear weapons facility, home of the nation's main supply of highly enriched uranium. Sister Rice was initially charged with a misdemeanor crime of trespassing, but felony charges came sort of fast and furious, and eventually the 83-year-old nun was convicted with the heinous crimes of interfering with national security and damage to federal property. Today, Sister Rice and her 2 accomplices are currently in the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia, awaiting their sentence. So what happened was these 3, along with an 83-year-old nun, came in with flashlights and bolt cutters, and they defied barbed wire, which was their great security that was going on, armed guards, motion sensors. The 83-year-old nun got past her security. And what they did was they splashed, fake blood on the facility, on the window, and, hung banners, and that's it. That's what they did.
Protest stuff.
30 years in prison.
Yeah, and basically the protesters are arguing that, while they entered the plant with the intention of causing, the symbolic damage, their nonviolent behavior and their peaceful natures could not be interpreted as trying to interfere with the national security defense system. They really were just going in there to make a political statement. So I'll give you trespassing. Yes, they did trespass. Charge them with that.
Yeah.
What the hell is an 83-year-old? How's that a threat to national security?
Yeah, I want to know what district attorney decided that was a great,
Bill Quigley, a law professor who works pro bono for the 3, he was quoted as saying, "We believe really strongly that they did not do anything that could be constituted as sabotage or violating the national security of the U.S. The prosecution admits that national security was not damaged. Their theory is that even though it wasn't damaged, the protesters had intent to do damage." In his ruling, District Judge Amul Thapar stated, "The defendants sincerely held moral beliefs are not a get-out-of-jail-free card that they can deploy to escape criminal liability." I'm sorry, again, if you're going to convict them on intent, but then in the same ruling, say, well, their intent wasn't to do this, so we still have to charge, we still have to then convict them of this crime. It doesn't, I'm sorry, it doesn't wash with me. It seems to me like you're just punishing people because you don't like their political beliefs. Right. That's, I think, where it really comes down to.
Well, I mean, the judge cites the defendant's phone calls made while in custody, including one that Rice said the 3 entered with this idea of the begin the work of disarmament. And the judge argues that the evidence that they acted to frustrate the plant's mission to store and enrich uranium, which falls under activities of national preparedness. Again, an 83-year-old woman with some bolt cutters, a bucket of fake blood, and a flashlight. and you thought she had a serious intent to break into an highly enriched uranium facility and cause serious damage. First of all, I don't think she could figure out how to do it. And if she could, then your entire facility sucks, and you need to go back and figure out what you're doing.
It's ludicrous.
Common sense.
Yeah, it's really ludicrous. And I think the other reason they're throwing the book at this person who's, remember, 83.
It was an 83-year-old woman, a 57-year-old woman, and a 63-year-old woman.
Yeah, right, or 2 men, 53.
Two men. Sorry. So two men. It was like.
So basically, like older to middle-aged men and a really old nun threat national security. I think one of the major reasons that they're doing this, apart from wanting to throw the book because I think that kind of mentality, they're against peace. They don't want peace because that threatens their jobs. But I think the other reason is that President Obama, since 2010, has led a campaign to eliminate or lock down nuclear materials as a way to fight atomic terrorism, basically saying, look at how secure our nuclear facilities are.
Yeah.
Oops, we just let an 83-year-old break into one. Doesn't really show that you're really securing our facilities.
No.
So I think that's the other thing, is that I think that this woman,
because what if
not only did she throw red blood paint on the facility, she also threw paint and blood on the rest of this country, in the sense of, sorry, you guys look like fools. I broke your massive security system. I
don't know. Maybe it was just all a big. Maybe it's all just a marketing campaign for that new Vegas
or maybe
movie. What if all these retirement age people start thinking they can just go out and start acting like crazy young political activists? What's going to happen?
Well, and then also it's important to note that Sister Rice has been an anti-nuclear activist like her entire life. She started back in the 70s. This is what she does.
Yeah.
And again, it's none. Like, I'm sorry, like I said, she trespassed, give her that, throw the book at her for trespassing, but, threat to national security, are you fucking kidding me?
If an 83-year-old nun is a threat to your national security, we need new national security people.
Right.
Because we are in serious danger. Yeah. Well, moving forward from nuns and nukes, we've said it before and we'll say it again. Things aren't always what they seem, and a critical eye in this day and age is an act of patriotism. The NSA, the IRS, and the TSA are all government agencies that we, the people, universally agree are in desperate need of reform. From illegal search and seizure at airports to misuse of funds and agenda based on tax investigations to illegally spying on all our emails, reforms to these agencies are long overdue and much needed. Thankfully, as we've reported, some politicians and business leaders are doing their jobs, listening to the people and pushing true reform. Some, however, are nothing more than, crony capitalist wolves draped in the libertarian wool of reform.
This is a story that really jumped out
Everybody
to me.
Take a breath for this one.
This one really jumped out at me because what you have here is, we're going to list off about 3 people who I think are incredible hypocrites, who, like you said, are kind of wrapping themselves in the blanket of libertarianism, but really deep down, they're nothing more than crony capitalists using the system to get what they want. But they're casing it in a certain political ideology that then betrays the rest of the people of that political ideology, makes the rest of them look bad.
Right. They don't really believe it. They're not about the movement. It's the same as people who jump from being, I'm going to be a libertarian, I'm going to be independent, I'm going to be a Republican for whatever election it seems to suit me. And I feel like these people are using.
They're completely using that. And we're going to kick off with Representative John Mica, a Republican out of Florida. The Congress has long been calling for the privatization of the TSA, claiming that it is inefficient and violates Americans' rights. He's saying it's, messed up. He's also jumped on the board of criticizing the NSA and things like that. However, when you look a little bit closer at why he would be doing this, it's not for the good of the public.
What?
No, actually, he's doing it because Covenant, a private security contractor, is based in his home district, and Covenant is a company that has airport screening contracts in a number of airports around America, supplanting the TSA at small airports like in Tupelo, Mississippi. So basically what he wants to do, and also if you look at the government's boards, one of its executives, Gerald Barry, is a large donator to MICA. So basically what that is hey, we got to get rid of this security infrastructure because it's a violation of our rights, and I think we could do it better privately. And secretly, I have this guy over here who's on the board of this company who's donating to me. And so clearly, if we get rid of the federal TSA, we can put the private businesses that pay me money in charge of it.
Right.
That's not capitalism, like we talked about earlier. That's crony capitalism. That's part of the problem. That's part of the root causes of why we're in this mess.
It's it goes back to that thing. And I just want to point out again, if you don't want people to think your company's nefarious and up to something, don't name it things like Covenant and it's your security. Just check with people. Maybe check online and be like, hey guys, does this sound creepy to you? Yeah, it sounds creepy. Going on to the second person that came up during this investigation, PayPal co-founder and billionaire Peter Thiel calls himself a libertarian. He's very outspoken about that. He dedicated millions of dollars to backing Ron Paul's presidential campaign. He also founded defense contractor Palantir Technologies, which has done work for the Central Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and other government agencies that are anything but libertarian.
Yeah, see, this is like one of those things where it's like I'm looking at this guy going like, okay, so you give money to Ron Paul, who is one of the biggest proponents of closing down this military infrastructure, that this global domination of America. But at the same time, you're funding companies that work directly with the agencies that want this global supremacy of the world.
Right. I find it hard to understand how someone can say, I'm a libertarian, and be the founder of a defense contractor.
It's tough for me to believe that, because defense contractors by their very nature want American supremacy in a global scale, which goes directly against the beliefs of Ron Paul. So I'd love to get Peter Thiel and be like, Peter, how the hell do you weigh that?
Do you guys ever
Are you just doing like, tongue window dressing so you sound really cool because you're PayPal? Like, come on, buddy.
Money.
My other favorite guy, and we're kind of hitting, politician, businessman, and now we have policy wonk.
Oh, love him.
Seton Motley, president of an advocacy organization called Less Government, and he's also a policy expert with the Heartland Institute. He authored a column in USA Today blasting National Security Agency abuses. Motley's solution is not to simply restrict the government's ability to spy on Americans, which I think is what we all want. No, he calls for us to outsource the first line of defense to telecom companies. So basically he wants telecom companies to take over the job of the NSA because, well, they already have all the secret information anyway, so why are we sharing it? Why do they have to share it with the government when they could be the ones who are, spying on us and keeping track of all these things?
I don't understand.
Why would he do that, I wonder? Where does that logic come from? Oh, well, it comes from the leaked documents. It was revealed that the Heartland Institute took $285,000 from the telecommunications industry in a short span between 2010 and 2011. Again, it's one of those things, you follow the money. These people aren't libertarians. These people, aren't practicing what they believe in. They're pushing agendas under the guise of libertarianism just to line their own pockets. And that is dangerous. You see it happen with the Democrats all the time. You see it happen with Republicans all the time. So that's why it's very important to pay attention to the leaders of the political cause or party that you align yourself with.
And as people who are also, as libertarians who truly believe, or whatever your party or non-party, whatever your beliefs are, look at the people who are saying that they are one of you.
Yes.
And when you see people like, Motley and Thiel and Micah, and you see them saying these things under the guise of being libertarian, it should piss you off. Yes. And you should tell them it pisses you off that they're doing this under the guise of that, because it's unfair, and they shouldn't just be supported because they get to put a stamp on it and say, I'm a libertarian, so you can't say anything.
Yeah.
As libertarians, you should be saying something about every one of these people.
Like I said, and it goes for every party, every political thing that you belong to. Pay attention to who is your most outspoken leaders. Make sure you know that their intentions are truly for you and not just to line their own pockets and wolves in sheep's clothing.
Exactly. It's just as important to call out the people that you feel aren't doing their job as it is to support the ones you feel are and supporting your beliefs. You have to be aware of those things and get out there.
Don't follow the Pied Piper. Always question the Pied Piper.
Exactly. At the core of this, we talk about the government shutdown and all of this spending, and we're always talking about hearing about how much government spends and how we spend too much and things need to be cut. Well, at the core of the debate on spending are things like food stamps. Is feeding the needy really such a big problem that we keep hearing on all of the mainstream media? Well, according to recent estimates, 1 in 6 Americans will go hungry in the next year. That's 1 in 6. Last month, the House Republicans passed a bill that would cut $40 billion out of food stamp spending over the next 10 years. The bill has caused quite a stir here at Buzzsaw, and we look at the number and we think numbers generally don't lie. So let's take a look at the numbers regarding the current poverty and hunger crisis in the United States and see if we really don't need to be spending this money, or is there an actual problem that we as Americans can address in an intelligent way.
And I think, it's important to point out as we get into these statistics that okay, A, let's look at the statistics and see if there is a problem. And then B, let's find out what's a better way to solve this problem than just kind of, slash and burning in a budget. Let's actually look at what we need to do. So the first statistics we found is, this is important, households with children reported a significantly higher food insecurity rate than households without children, 20.6% to 12.2%. So households with children actually have less food security and are more likely to go hungry than households with. That's really huge numbers, especially in this country. More than 1 in 5 children is at risk of hunger. Among African Americans and Latinos, it's 1 in 3.
It's unacceptable.
Unacceptable numbers for a country that prides itself on being, a world leader. It's unacceptable.
We're a developed nation. We have fund drives to feed people in other countries, and we don't even pay attention to the people who need to be fed here. And I've talked about it, like children going hungry. Food insecurity, which this is the idea of food insecurity. What happens is when you have so much money at the end of the week and you have to choose between keeping the electricity on or buying food or keeping gas in your car so you can get to work or buying food. It's that sort of insecurity. It's not people who are most of them are not just sitting around, with no money whatsoever. It's having to choose between one thing or another. It exists in every single county in America. In 2011, 17.9 million households were considered food insecure, and 50.1 million Americans. Over 50 million Americans right now are struggling to put food on the table.
It's incredible. 1 in 7 people are actually enrolled in SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps, as it's commonly referred to. 1 in 7.
Yeah.
Yes. Is there the possibility that out of all of those people, is there, the people that are kind of, as Republicans like to say, they're lazy and they're kind of riding the coattails and they're buying steaks and all that. There probably is some graft in that program.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you still have to realize that there's a problem. Don't just get caught up in whether or not people are abusing a program. Actually look at, why is the program there? Well, the program's there because 1 in 7 people need food.
Right.
And they can't afford to buy it. Here's the other thing that really gets under my craw. 40% of food thrown out there's 40% of food is thrown out in the U.S. every year. 40%, or about $165 billion worth. All of this uneaten food could feed 25 million Americans. The food that we throw out could feed half of the 50 million people that struggle to get food on their table.
Right.
That kind of waste is
It's staggering. And the reason for that on a lot of scales isn't because companies or people or restaurants or these people are just willy-nilly throwing things away. They are often forced under FDA guidelines, OSHA guidelines. There's all of these guidelines by the government that is overseeing them, that's not allowing them to use that food. That's why you'll go to a grocery store and food that's perfectly good. I used to know a lot of freegans and dumpster divers in New York, but I would go to their house, and I knew this one girl who she didn't buy groceries. She literally went around the city, and there was a group, and they would go through, bakeries and grocery stores and things, and that woman ate better than I did, and I was buying groceries, and it was because things just get thrown out before they're useful, and they get destroyed because there's this, it's all about these health things. We have 7 states that specifically have higher food insecurity rates than the U.S. national average, which is 14.7.
That's the average of the across the entire country.
Which is Terrible.
Let me hear these states. I want to hear one.
So you have Mississippi, which is at 19.2%. That's nearly 20% of the population having a food insecurity. Texas at 18.5, Arkansas 19.2, Alabama 17.4, Georgia 17.4, Florida 16.2, and North Carolina at 17.1. You're talking about nearly 20% of your population is going hungry. They have to worry about whether they can keep a roof over their heads, get to work, or deal, God forbid.
Yeah, they have to pick one of the three.
You have to pick something. You either have to have food, shelter, or clothing.
Right.
And
you know what this, Joel Berg, an executive director of the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, he was quoted as saying, "Wall Street is in hyper overdrive, but America, in terms of job creation, in terms of poverty, is not in recovery. The very people who implemented the policies that sunk our economic ship are now complaining about giving food life preservers to the drowning." That's a good quote, because that's what you hear a lot. And here's my thing. When you have, all right, we recognize there's a problem of hunger. Why? Because we have a problem with poverty in this country that no one wants to admit exists. We have a major problem with poverty. Okay. Should the government have a program to handle that? Some would argue no, some would argue yes. For the people that argue no, I understand there's valid arguments for that. Like you even said, FDA rules and things like that make people waste food. Government, it's not perfect. It doesn't run things correctly a lot of times. Sometimes it does, and it should be done. If you're going to ask the government to cut all of these people off of food stamps and cut that budget, then I would hope that you, as a good American, to follow your beliefs, would then turn around in your own private life and practice being a good citizen by saying, okay, I don't want my government handling this because I don't want another government program and all this wasted money. I'm going to take my money and I'm going to make sure that these people over here in my community can eat.
Right.
I'm going to donate food to food shelters. I'm going to, set up soup lines. I'm going to do all of that to help these people that now I'm saying the government shouldn't help anymore because there's a few people that take advantage of a system. Yeah,
which is, there's always that thing of, well, it's always, as someone who grew up in Wisconsin, I used to hear a lot growing up about the welfare queens and everybody's, using the situation. It's ironic, because the Republicans will always rail about food stamps and they'll always push to do it. And the truth is, when you look at the actual numbers of the program itself, the food stamp program is actually probably one of the single most least wasteful programs. In fact, there's statistics that are out there that estimate from economists that by giving someone $1 in food stamps, you're actually putting like $1.50 up to $1.50 into the economy, because they're going out and spending money, which then is bringing money into a grocery store, which helps someone else keep their job working at the checkout line, and all of this money sort of goes back into in getting the economy moving, and we don't look at that. And there's the irony. Here's something that would increase the situation we're in and actually isn't wasteful, and you're doing it. Every dollar spent on making sure that children, especially, that have got enough to eat. And food activists argue that what the U.S. saves in that situation is things in special education costs, lifelong health and hospitalization, and in prison costs, because if children are well fed, they do better in school, all of that. And
I think again, it's like, does every government program need a little reform to make sure that you make it as good and strong as possible? Of course, and so I'll never argue with that, But at the end of the day, we have to pay attention. We have to make sure that if you are going to cut a program or fight to cut a program, that you are a responsible American citizen and say, hey, you know what, there is a problem with hunger. I don't want the government handling it because the government doesn't handle things well. But I myself, I'm going to take the initiative myself as a business owner, as all of that, to make sure that people in my community are eating and do have the benefit of getting food, which, like you pointed out, cuts down on crime, cuts down on a lot of things, lets people get a job, lets people get healthy, cuts down on healthcare costs, all of that. It's very important.
I find it strange because I grew up. I've been a recipient of those programs at different times of my life. I've never been on welfare. My parents were never on welfare per se, but I grew up at a time when you had government cheese and they were called government commodities. And there was a sense of community because my grandmother and I would go with her to the church where they had these, it used to be, you know, you got so many boxes of powdered milk and you got the cheese, which is like Velveeta. And anybody who knows about government cheese, we used to call it government cheese, it makes the best grilled cheese, the best macaroni and cheese ever. I don't know what they do. It's probably a DARPA thing. DARPA makes the government cheese. The government would probably make a serious profit if they just started marketing it. But we would get things like powdered milk and peanut butter, and there were certain things, and there would be produce there, and it was, here, let's help you with something. And there was never a sense that you're a bad person because of that. It was a sense of everyone needs a little help, and everyone deserves a little help. And when I, a few years ago, was struggling to find work in Los Angeles, anything over minimum wage, and I was suddenly at a point where I realized I could pay my bills or I could eat. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to it when at the end of the day you have $7 and you're supposed to make $7 to mm-hmm. feed yourself mm-hmm. for an entire week. You think about these things. Yeah. And I went to that, I went and I applied for food stamps and I was on them for a few months and they were very helpful. I didn't abuse it. I didn't run out and buy, oddly enough I couldn't buy drugs or whiskey or, all of these, I couldn't even buy certain kinds of tea. It wasn't covered under it. So there are regulations and there are things. I think the people I saw in those offices were not people who were looking for a handout. They were people who were desperate. Yeah. And I, as someone, I had to go in and work 12 hours a month in the food stamp office in order to have my food stamps. And I was happy to do it. Yeah. And because I felt like you're giving me something, I will give something back. And I think if there was a sense of community, mm-hmm. You just don't let people starve. Don't be a jerk about it.
How hard is it? I mean, why don't you cut a little bit out of the defense spending if you're worried about that thing?
Here we come to the end of another week of Buzzsaw. And brings me to thinking about Jesus. Not how you think. For some of us, the idea that the story of Jesus Christ has been manipulated by many in power throughout the centuries is nothing new. Little is surprising when you're talking about good old JC. Until now. And however, this new theory that has come out leaves even me taken aback and intrigued. American biblical scholar Joseph Atwill on October 19th in London will be presenting a controversial new discovery that the story of Jesus Christ was in fact the most successful psyops operation in history. Atwill, who wrote a book on the subject called Caesar's Messiah, claims he's found ancient confessions that the Romans invented Jesus Christ and his story as basically a form of propaganda to pacify subjects within the Roman Empire. Atwill states, quote, "The biography of Jesus is actually constructed, tip to stern, on prior stories, but especially on the biography of a Roman Caesar."
This is really a fascinating story because, when you look at how the government, how systems of control work throughout history, religion is one of the biggest. Mm-hmm. They use religion to kind of, control and manipulate the populace. Doesn't mean that having faith is bad.
No.
But
no.
Organized religion is always a system of control and will always be used to start wars, subjugate people, tell you that one side's bad, the other side's good. Yep. They use it as propaganda all the time. So Atwill, asserting that Christianity didn't really begin as a religion, but was like a sophisticated government project by the Romans, doesn't surprise me. It doesn't. It shocks. It's like, wow, we didn't know that till now, or that's intriguing. Tell me more. But it doesn't surprise me if it does prove out to be true. Mm-hmm.
What he wrote. Here's one quote from what he's talked about. Quote, "Jewish sects in Palestine at the time who were waiting for a prophesized warrior Messiah were a constant source of violent insurrection during the first century. When the Romans had exhausted conventional means of squashing rebellion, they switched to psychological warfare. That's when the peaceful Messiah story was invented. Instead of inspiring warfare, this Messiah urged turn the other cheek pacifism and encouraged Jews to give unto Caesar and pay their taxes to Rome." End quote.
That's very fascinating stuff. I mean, like I said, it's one of those theories where you hear it and you're kind of like, could be logical, could be interesting, but let's dig into this. He's also speaking about this, I think, coming up on like the 19th in London, and he's formally said, anyone who wants to come and argue these points with me and argue history with me, I'm fully open to hearing the arguments. He came about this discovery while he was studying Wars of the Jews by Josephus, this ancient kind of text, and he was studying that alongside with the New Testament. And he says, I started to notice a sequence of parallels between the two texts. Though it's been recognized by Christian scholars for centuries that the prophecies of Jesus appear to be fulfilled by what Josephus wrote about in the First Jewish-Roman War, he was actually seeing many, many, many more similarities. And that's what made him kind of going like, wait a minute, are these stories or prophecies, or are they actually
history?
Or are they actually a designed thing, and they're based on this rather than being, prophesized?
Yeah.
There's
a sequence of events and locations of Jesus' sort of ministry are more or less the same sequence of events that are talked about in events and locations of a military campaign of an emperor known as Titus Flavius, as described by Josephus in his work. So you have this clear evidence of a deliberately constructed pattern. You're taking something that has historical significance and a story, and they've sort of, it just all, it's like you lay it over it and you're like, wait, this timeline seems familiar.
Vaguely familiar, yeah.
And one thing about it is that I spent years, having gone to a Catholic high school and a Catholic university, I spent all years, religious study, your regular basic stuff. Very little of that was about historical context. You were just told, no, he's a real guy. No, they know.
Yeah.
But there was never the historical context of what was going on except for what was in the Bible. And anyone, as his biblical scholars know, there was a great deal of information and a great deal of history that is locked away in the Vatican that they don't let out, because you have to understand these books, some of these things were written and printed and published at a time when there were only, we're talking about printing presses, and you only have so many copies of a certain text, and that is a historical significance. The only copies are either owned by the Vatican, which keeps them locked away and nobody gets to read them, or by private citizens who lock them away and nobody gets to read them.
Again, it's interesting to study this history because, would you put it past an empire like Rome to come, these are smart guys, they're running an empire. Would you put it past them to say, well, if one thing's not working, let's try this other thing?
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating, and I think there's I'll be interesting to see what other evidence he can come out to.
I'm excited to read the book. I think it's a really exciting thing, and it's we talk about it all the time on here.
Comes out, it'd be the biggest conspiracy of all time.
I know, conspiracy theories. I'm excited. Caesar's Messiah. Right at the time when Bill O'Reilly has his new book about killing Jesus.
Well, Bill wrote a book.
Yeah.
I wonder which one's going to be more truthful. Bill O'Reilly or biblical historian? Bill O'Reilly, biblical historian.
I'm going to go with...
It's a dead heat.
It's a dead heat. Thank you, everyone. Love to see your comments. Keep them coming on YouTube, on the Facebook page at Buzzsaw, and on Twitter at Enter the Buzzsaw. We love your comments. Keep them coming, your ideas. Thank you so much for watching and for being here every week with us.
Thank you very much for joining us, Tabitha, and delivering the news as only you know how. And that is it for the show today, everyone. Be safe, be good, and like I always say, we're not told enough that we're loved, so I look at you now and say, I love you all. Have a great week. Buenos dias, Buzzketeers. I'm Tyrell Ventura, and this is a new episode of Buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Oh, I love another episode of Buzzsaw. Why? Because it fills me with such joy when I get to talk about things like the Illuminati, the Hunger Games racing across America, crony capitalism, all modeled as libertarianism, and the quite possible Citizens United 2.0. And with me to talk about these issues today is always Tabitha Wallace.
Hello. And hello to everyone out there. As you said, the Illuminati, since we started Buzzsaw, I haven't done as many stories about it since we did at the beginning. I know Sean has some great interviews on the subject. However, we haven't talked about it much here. Then I came across a story that kind of got me excited about the Illuminati again, which is a strange thing to say on this show, but back on December 12th, 1972, Marie Helene Rothschild, a member of what is known as one of the most powerful families in the world, held a surrealist ball at one of the Rothschilds' many mansions, known as Chateau de Ferrier. Extremely secretive events. There were very few images have ever surfaced of these alleged balls that many who purport the Illuminati theory have said happen. And until now, when these pictures and a series of them showed up from this ball in 1972, from Salvador Dali doing his own version of Blue Steel to Audrey Hepburn in a birdcage, it is a cornucopia of Illuminati symbolism. I have to say that when I finally get to time travel, I'm going to this party.
Well, this is definitely one of the most bizarre series of photo the scenes, and yet probably on the campaign trail saying, I'm here and I'm working for you, and I'm going to raise up the city of Detroit along with my bank account.
Yeah, he thought that flashy suits and being, but what's really sad is he really did give this, he's everything that's wrong with America when you have somebody who went up and had flashy cars and flashy suits to be like, I'm the mayor of Detroit, it's all going to be okay, and he was using their money to sort of, it's old school. It's, the king who covers himself in gold so that his people believe that he's, powerful and there's lots of money, and really he's using the money that should be used to feed them to put
well,
gold on them.
It is good to know that his punishment ranks amongst one of the harshest major state and local police corruption cases. Like of all the police corruption and all public corruption cases we've had across this country, his punishment was one of the most severe.
And he deserves it. He deserves every
when you
minute.
have Detroit looking like that, you would hope they'd get some mayors in there that weren't acting like this.
Right. Well, as Kwame Kilpatrick is sort of taking responsibility for his actions, although says that he's going to appeal, some other government officials, if they're quite ready to take responsibility, on Wednesday, October 19th, during a meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee, NSA Director Keith Alexander became yet another government official to admit a crime against the citizens of the United States and just forget to lie about it. Committee Chairman Senator Patrick Leahy stated that, quote, there is no evidence that bulk phone records collections helped to thwart dozens or even several terrorist plots. Leahy then asked the NSA chief to admit that only 13 out of the previously claimed 54 cases of foiled plots were genuinely the fruits of the government's vast dragnet surveillance system, going on to say, quote, they weren't all plots and they weren't all...
Well, I think this is an important story to look at because it's a microcosm, I think, of what's happening on a federal level when you get into these, when you get into them talking about the debt ceiling and shutting down the federal government, that, if this local mayor of one of the biggest, one of the big cities in the country is this corrupt, what's happening on a federal level. And so that's why it's important to look at stories like these. I mean, in 2008, Mr. Kilpatrick resigned after he lied under oath during a police whistleblowing lawsuit and approved an $8.4 million settlement to try and cover it up. Then after he pled guilty to obstruction of, charges of obstruction of justice, Kilpatrick served 4 months in jail and was ordered to pay $1 million back to the city. And then he was behind bars again for hiding assets from the court and telling a judge that he could afford to pay only $6 a month in restitution. This is a guy who's clearly a criminal holding office. And it always begs that question, how many more criminals are holding office?
That we don't know about. He was convicted in March on 24 counts that included racketeering and extortion. And that was along with 18 city officials who had been convicted of corruption during his tenure. They were all connected. She's talking about only the 20 people who got convicted and who were found out about what they were doing. I mean, this was straight up mob mentality.
Oh, yeah.
They were, we're talking about cash for contracts. You're talking about people getting jobs who shouldn't have been getting jobs. It was incredibly corrupt, and
it was the standard kind of like, graft and ickiness that goes on in politics, I think, on a daily basis in this country. And it's nice to see that these guys were caught. I do have a question. I mean, I don't know all the logistics of it, but I mean, after all of these things and being charged and lying under oath and like all of this thing, like, I mean, God, the people of Detroit must have been like, who the hell were we voting for?
Oh, I know.
The lies that they tell on the campaign trail, it just boggles the mind at like how this guy's doing all this moving and shaking behind,
walking around with full-on gold horned headdresses.
Yeah, and like Baphomet, like big deer antlers and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of really just creepy symbology going on there, and maybe it is just a wild, wacky party for a few rich and famous people. But then again, you have to sit and ask yourself, what's really the action going on there?
And I have to say, I've said it before on this show about the Illuminati and the things we've seen, like if you remember hearkening back to one of our first episodes, we talked about the secret hotel room.
Yes, in Texas.
In Texas, and all I could think of was that like, this is supposed to be the secret society's Illuminati. Like, where did all the style go? Here it is.
Right there in 1972 at the Rothschild Mansion.
The Rothschilds had style. I'll give them that much. Well, as we move on to less happy stories than women in beautiful birdcage hats, the national parks remain closed. Government contractors are being laid off every day, and the fight over who gets to beat which dead horse rages on in Capitol Hill. But in Detroit, in the great state of Michigan, we have one corrupt politician who seems to actually be paying for his crimes. Former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick was sentenced to 28 years in prison this week on over 17 federal counts, including mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, all taking place during his tenure as mayor. His actions have been directly linked to the city's bankruptcy. And in the words of Adolfo Mongo, who was a political consultant who worked for Mr. Kilpatrick's re-election campaign, he says, quote, "He's become the poster child for what went wrong with the city and why it went bankrupt." Kilpatrick has said this, quote, "They're hurting. A great deal of that hurt I accept full responsibility for," end quote. Lawyers for Kilpatrick, of course, intend to file an appeal of the conviction and the sentence.
Photographs kind of ever surface, and apart from Lady Gaga salivating violently over like the imagery that these people displayed, it is one of those kind of very creepy moments of like, look at all these like very powerful people in this surrealist ball in '72. Now maybe it's just because they were all doing a lot of acid. But when you look at like the names and the people who attended this event and the secrecy of the event, it does beg the question of that kind of, what are these like super powerful people into? And, I must confess that, if Audrey Hepburn ever came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to be part of the Illuminati? I am, and you get to marry me," that's a
hard no.
Yeah, I don't know if I could say no to Audrey. That's a tough one.
I mean, it's Audrey Hepburn.
But it's important to look at these things to know that, that's. Why is it important? Why do you talk about things like this? Because you have to pay attention to what the rich and powerful, are doing, what they're into, what they're experiencing. Why? Because these are the people that I think we universally agree on kind of run the world to a certain extent. And we need to know what they're into to help prepare ourselves for whatever weird, bizarre ideas they come up with next.
It's true. And I think the one thing for me is from a historical and a cultural perspective is that when we talk about these things and they like to, the naysayers of the Illuminati theories like to say that it's movies and they didn't have these parties and it's not like Eyes Wide Shut and it's not...
They got weird dismembered babies and naked women and it's not that far off from Eyes Wide Shut.
No, and you're talking about the surrealist ball. You have Salvador Dali. There's a movement within surrealism, and there was a movement going on, and if you look at the philosophy of that movement, it does have, it coincides with what's going on. And when you have people who have that much power, that you have entertainment and artists coming together at these what were clearly, it was a hell of a party in 1972, it's understanding your history of these things and that these people are involved. And it's not just made up. These things do happen. You have women